We begin tonight in Georgia, where former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani is now considered a target of a criminal investigation, as a Fulton County grand jury investigates efforts of the former president and his supporters to overturn the 2020 election. Giuliani's lawyer confirmed this to CBS News as his client is scheduled to appear before a special grand jury Wednesday. Giuliani was among Trump's closest confidants and appeared before the Georgia State Senate in December 2020, in which he made unfounded claims of misconduct among state officials. Meanwhile, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is being ordered to testify before a grand jury in Georgia, the grand jury investigating former President Trump's actions after the 2020 election. Graham's office said today he will appeal that ruling. For more on this and all the day's top political stories, Ed O'Keefe and David Drucker join us now. Ed is CBS News' senior White House and political correspondent, and David is senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Ed, let's start with you. Despite all the noise around this, the investigations related to the 2020 election are very much marching forward, if not accelerating. What's happened in the past few hours, and what are the latest developments from the Department of Justice about Mar-A-Lago and about Georgia?
Yeah, and not only that, but then, of course, January 6th, there's a handful of things. So strap in here, folks. Let's start with this. The Justice Department this afternoon responding to legal moves by media organizations seeking to unseal the affidavit that led to the Mar-A-Lago search by the FBI. Responding a short time ago, the Justice Department did, saying they don't want it released because, quote, disclosure of the government's affidavit at this stage would likely chill future cooperation by witnesses whose assistance may be sought as this investigation progresses. They add later that the fact that there is highly classified materials further underscores the need to protect the integrity of the investigation. So in other words, the Justice Department asking the judge, don't unseal it. There's some other documents related to it the media is happy to have, they said, but otherwise there's too much sensitive info in there. Beyond that, let's go down to the state of Georgia, as you mentioned, where you mentioned Lindsey Graham being told by a federal judge today he's going to have to testify to a grand jury that is investigating alleged election interference in the wake of the 2020 results. Remember, the senator had called Georgia officials at the request of the former president to try to find out how their system worked. At least that's what he says. He asked the federal judge to toss it. The federal judge said just because you're a senator doesn't mean you don't have to testify. You're going to have to testify, but he's now appealing. Separate of that, a lawyer for former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani tells CBS News that Giuliani now is the subject of a criminal investigation related to all this. He will be in Georgia on Wednesday to appear in some stuff that they've been trying to put off, his attorneys have. But now, because he's the subject of a criminal investigation, the lawyer says they'll be showing up. Beyond that, going back to the Mar-A-Lago matter, for example, on the political front, CBS News was first to report that now members of the House Judiciary Committee, Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee, are asking 3 top Biden administration officials to preserve all their records and communications regarding the Mar-A-Lago search warrant. They're asking Attorney General Merrick Garland, the FBI Director Chris Wray, and the White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain to preserve all communications they had about the lead-up to that investigation. Important to point out, the White House has repeatedly said they did not have any heads-up, that they learned about it, as we did, through the news media and through the former president's statement. There is a long-standing Biden administration policy that divorces and keeps separate most West Wing officials from Justice Department officials, and there are loops they have to jump through in order to not loops, in order to communicate with anybody at the Justice Department on any matter, specifically to avoid any suggestion of politics or interference, and in anticipation of these kinds of congressional requests. The ones from the Judiciary Committee, the Republican members signal they believe they'll have control of Congress next year, and this will be a top issue of congressional oversight.
So all these threads, all of this happening simultaneously, David, the question is, who is the former president going to confide in and meet with? Who is the inner circle now for him?
Well, look, I think he keeps the same couple of people in his inner circle that he consults with. That usually are his children, his son-in-law, a couple of top strategists. But ultimately, Donald Trump keeps his own counsel. And often he is bobbing and weaving and throwing spaghetti at the wall here, and there's not some greater strategy. He takes many of his cues, in fact, from the Republican base, even though it seems like he leads them along so often. He kind of checks in with them, sees where they are on a particular matter, and if he likes what he hears, he runs with it. That's exactly what he's been doing in regard to his reaction to the FBI search of his residence and social club, Mar-A-Lago. The base was up in an uproar about it, and so is Donald Trump.
Ed, in the meantime, there's another Republican in Florida of some notoriety. There's Governor Ron DeSantis, and there's been this talk about a chill in the relationship between Trump and DeSantis. Yet, Ron DeSantis was there in Arizona this weekend supporting two Trump-backed candidates. So what did he have to say in Trump's defense?
Well, he certainly had something to say, and it's notable that Ron DeSantis is now traveling outside his state with just about a week to go until his own primary, in which he's uncontested. But he's now starting to use his own political capital to help other Republicans and to help former President Trump. Take a listen to what he said.
These agencies have now been weaponized to be used against people that the government doesn't like. And you look at the raid at Mar-A-Lago, and I'm trying to remember, maybe someone here can remind me about when they did a search warrant at Hillary's house in Chappaqua, when she had a rogue server and she was laundering classified information. I don't remember them doing that. I do remember them manufacturing a false conspiracy theory about Russia collusion.
So even if there is a rift of some kind, he's certainly out there publicly defending the former president against what the FBI did last week and suggesting that he's being unfairly targeted. He may be doing that for crass political reasons because he knows that in order to win a Republican primary, you got to win the base. And right now, the base is with the former president. But either way, he's out there providing some public defense, as are most other leading Republicans. And pointing out there, we should point out that he's at an event that is sponsored by this Turning Point Action Group, essentially a group of younger Republicans, more conservative folks, and he'll be doing similar visits later this week to Pennsylvania and Ohio for Senate and gubernatorial candidates in those states. So interesting to see him out there, and interesting to see him out there with a third party, essentially, or a separate organization in the Republican sphere who's helping sponsor these events and pay for them so that the candidates themselves don't have to cover those costs. And an example, again, of how Republicans are rallying around the former president. Whether that's good long-term politics remains to be seen, but in the short term, they understand they got to do it.
So, David, you hear Governor DeSantis pushing back against the FBI. Is any of this drama around the FBI search of Mar-A-Lago becoming part of the Republican midterm message?
Well, for the time being, it is, and I think you're going to hear a lot about this from Republicans in the weeks ahead. And of course, then at some point, the extended August recess for Congress will come to an end. They'll all flood back into D.C. And I'm sure a lot of Republicans will put their faces in front of cameras and say what a travesty it is that a search warrant was executed at Mar-A-Lago. I think Republicans are going to want to be careful about this only in this regard. As long as they are talking about skyrocketing inflation, rising crime rates, and other issues that are really important to a broad spectrum of voters, Democrats, Republicans, and independents in particular, they're in a really good place because they can point fingers at President Joe Biden. Democrats control both the House and Senate, not by governing majorities, but voters don't really make those distinctions. And they can say things have not been great. We're in a recession. There are layoffs. Put us in charge of at least one chamber of Congress, if not both, and we can work with the president to moderate his policies and balance things out, at least put the brake pedals on the things you don't like that you're getting from Democrats. That's a really good message for them in the home stretch of the campaign. If they get too wrapped up in talking about Trump's issues with the FBI and all of the things Trump wants to talk about, it's going to hurt them in some of these swing seats. We may still see a Republican wave. They may still win a lot of these races, but they reduce their chances, of extending the map and winning bigger governing majorities that they're after. So I think that they can do this for, a few days, a week or two. They've got to get their core message back to the economy and these kitchen table issues that have worked so well for them.
Yeah, it reminds me of what we saw so frequently in the past 6 years, where the Trump story of the day blocks out the message for both parties, and they're both trying to cut through, and at this moment, it's difficult to do so. So with that antecedent, Ed, what is the current president up to in the coming weeks, and how's the White House trying to handle all these questions about his political future?
Well, he's on vacation right now, and they're perfectly fine keeping him out of the news because they'd all like to take some time off, or at least lie low as well. But he is coming back from the first part of his vacation tomorrow in Kiowa Island, South Carolina. Stop at the White House for a few hours to officially sign the Inflation Reduction Act, that big piece of Democratic passed legislation last week having to do with climate change, health care, and taxes on big corporations and the wealthy. They'll hold a bigger, broader, more politically themed campaign rally-style event on the day after Labor Day to celebrate it in a bigger way when more Americans are also not on vacation and maybe starting to pay attention to the elections. But he'll make it official tomorrow and go back onto vacation in Wilmington and Rehoboth Beach. After that, though, dozens of stops in more than 20 states by cabinet secretaries, the vice president, and the president to sell the climate and health care bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, the gun and mental health bill passed earlier this year, the CHIPS Act, that one that helps buoy the semiconductor industry, even the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed last year. They believe all of that combined is a demonstration of big, important work by Democrats on behalf of Americans and something they can go to voters with and say, look, despite the 50-50 divide, we got some big things done, and we did most of it without Republican help. Give us back control of Congress next year.
Ed O'Keefe, David Drucker, thank you both.
Take care.
Thank you.